Let's talk about how to know less and do way cooler things. And I mean cooler in the sense of things you are incapable of doing on your own. Like, given the span of your life, you could not produce, and how you can have even more variety, how you can even basically unlock so many things that you can enjoy, take part in, be a part of, if you make this key realization that I've realized is a common point of misunderstanding new people run into. Just had another person today remind me of this question, but it really is a theme that I realized I need some content around because it hits so many people wrong. Okay, now the gist of this is, first example, I really got this articulated to me. I've been doing it most of my life, but hadn't really figured out what this was in early iOS days. So we're talking 2008, maybe. Making games for that device, there wasn't a lot of example code out there yet. Some of Apple's provided example code was literally wrong. Sound files didn't play through using the official sound libraries that Apple tried to give you for iPhone and so on. But at this time, I had started using OpenGL to do some things with the game's graphics and basically starting to build a framework in there and getting a game together, and I did not really understand exactly what I was doing. There's a whole lot I didn't know about their APIs, about even the Objective-C language that I was using to code the game. And my roommate, who went on to do some other great game stuff and collaborating at the start of the project and so on, was the first person who pointed out that he was impressed at what I was able to do without really understanding it. Right? That I had not studied it, I had not looked at it, I had not read every single line. And what I realized what really unlocked this for me was that in the years prior, I had been part of so many bigger team projects and gotten used to this realization of you cannot learn 100% of it. You can't on a group project, on a big team project, especially a long-term, outside the size of a jam team project. There's too much there. Even as the project lead, you may not know every single function, every single class, every single piece of code, every single chunk of functionality, how the animation system works, how the particle system works, how entire bits and pieces work is essentially, ideally abstracted from people who need to use it. And then all they really have to do is figure out the pattern of houses that are already being used to then add an item, fit in a new kind of bad guy, design yet another space using those assets and features and functionality. And it's this mentality of when you realize you cannot learn 100% of something unless it's something you could have done yourself. There's going to be too much of it there. There's a line here, and this really extends beyond a single project in scope, but of course, since I work with people learning game development stuff in teams, in home team game dev, that's why it comes up for me. But on a much grander scale, so Neil Postman, incredibly smart person, I believe late Neil Postman at this point. He's a book writer. He wrote Amusing Ourselves to Death. It was basically predicting very harmful problems in the way news is told as a 24/7 almost entertainment cycle. He kind of participated in that stuff, anticipated that decades ahead. This is actually from his book Technopoly, which in 1992, so about 30 years ago, was pretty much predicting some of the challenges we'd have from social media and the way that's affected our discourse and things. But in this statement here, Neil Postman, again a smart person, said, as a college undergraduate, I was told by an enthusiastic professor of German literature that Goethe was the last person who knew everything. I assume she meant, by this astounding remark, less to deify Goethe than to suggest that by the year of his death, 1832, it was no longer possible for even the most brilliant mind to comprehend, let alone integrate, what was known. Right? I mean, I assume you're following me there. It's kind of, high level. That literally by 1832, the smartest person in the world could not know everything that there was to know. This might seem obvious in a modern context, but generally, think back to much of history, right? For thousands of years of human existence, there was a time when there wasn't a whole lot to know. There was a time when you guess how to start a fire, right? How to sharpen a stone or something. For a long time after, it wasn't even until, say, in the printing press, at which you could pretty well catch up on what people had figured out, right? There wasn't certainty about, heck, even astronomy guesses. Even among basic biology and alchemy was so much guesswork, and someone could kind of learn what there was to learn, and then move on and learn everything there was to learn about something else. And now here we're in a situation where even people who are deeply specialized in a field, like game development, may know something so totally different than what somebody else knows. Or any given scientist can't just necessarily transfer over to what another scientist knows. And specializations in general, right? So medical, legal kind of people, it's one of these fascinating effects where your neighbor who knows nothing about law will comfortably just speculate about all kinds of things. Meanwhile, your cousin who's an actual, let's say, divorce lawyer or something, will not comment on real estate law because they know exactly how much there is not to know. The doctor who expert kind of specialization is your heart won't speculate about your brain issues because they know how much there is not to know. And the further you get into specialization, the more you get skills useful in an area, the more you realize how much you will never be able to learn everything. Now, at first this can be frustrating, but ultimately it becomes freeing when you realize that you don't have to. You can't. It doesn't make any sense to be upset over what is literally impossible to do. Instead, what you start to do is you start asking instead, okay, well, how do I have to do everything myself? And you start asking, how do I cooperatively work with others? How do I find the people who have the complementary skills? How do I connect what we do together into something greater than any given one of us could do alone? And this is where nearly everything in the world worth checking out, enjoying, like exists at a scale of major impact comes from. It comes from people who are, any given person, not able to do it all themselves, not able to know it all themselves. The lead programmer of these games that we enjoy, right? They don't know every piece of their software. They're having to trust others who different pieces are carried by. And so then the skill, to go back to our initial thought of, okay, what is really the skill, the core discipline? How do we articulate this piece? Because it's not really just about, the ability to do something without really understanding it. The actual skill is getting comfortable with splashing around in a code base, in a project, in a challenge space, in a topic, in a subject matter that is outside of 100% your comfort zone, that you don't know every single thing there is to know about, but instead to look at it of how little can I learn about this and still achieve my intended result. And so like again, home team game dev, because of course that's the context I train people in, it literally is a case of one task or feature at a time. I have an objective, right? I've made a sound effect. I want to integrate my sound effect myself. We encourage people to be self-sufficient, autonomous, enough of a generalist that they're not bottlenecked by other people. Okay, well, given that, I need to learn just enough about how other sounds are hooked together in this code base, which might not even be the same one project to the next, might be some overlap. But okay, well, we'll kind of think our way through that process, and what we probably need to figure out is, how is some other sound that's already hooked in? Well, for example, we could find the name of a sound file, we could find the extension of a sound file, find in files that file name or that extension. That's going to lead us to some functions. That's going to lead it to a list or something. That's going to lead us to some clues of the pattern in place. Okay, well, there's an example of how to load it. We can pretty easily copy that pattern to load our sound effect or to load our art asset or something. Okay, well, then how to play or display it, the kind of asset that we're integrating. Same kind of thing. Okay, well, we already have an example of something else that's already in there, typically, because realistically, we're not the first person encountering this in this project, because these are long-term projects. So we find in files, once again, how is an existing piece plugged in somewhere? How is that shown somewhere? How is it played somewhere? And we can usually copy that pattern. And I kind of jokingly call this cheating on Spanish homework, because I remember it's not even cheating in like the, academic integrity sense, but it's cheating in the sense of basically getting through the worksheet without thinking about it. I remember I took a few years of Spanish and would like be doing our assignments, and I would really have to think a lot for the first answer or two. But then because it was still intro level foreign language, I would just kind of copy the structure going down and not really even have to spend any extra brain power on how or why that was the case. It was I figured out, well, the verb goes over here, noun goes, and it's just copy that pattern. And the exact same thing happens again. It's like, how little can I learn about this code base to achieve my desired practical result and then move on to the next task? And what begins happening is cumulatively, gradually over time, you're getting repetition, you're getting increasing overlap. If you picture the Venn diagram of sections of the code that you know, and even by the time the game's released, you still don't know 100% of it. But you've achieved enough sense for how to do this from different pieces and angles, that then when you want to go into another project, you've got this major kind of already web of connective understanding. You've already got these clusters and chunks of practical minimal understanding. And what in the case of the Spanish homework is probably counterproductive, because there it is helpful to concentrate and think about what you're doing. In the case of programming, what that's doing is it's freeing up your mental energy, your time, your attention, your effort to be spent on adding more features, doing more things, accomplishing more stuff on the project, instead of feeling like, well, I can't touch this code base until I've read every single line and understood every single piece. So we just had another person who's recently rejoined. He went off a couple years ago, and I'm very proud to say, and maybe we'll get some specific wording from him somewhere down the line, he had no college education in programming. He had no bootcamp experience, but just from building games through my help and within like kind of our home team approach, got used to working in projects bigger than himself, and now has a proper software engineering gig. Congrats, we're excited for him again, and might be able to use his exact wording one of these days. But what's neat about this was basically this realization of anytime you're going into a real software engineering situation, joining a team, joining a company, whether it's software, whether it's games for that matter, if it's commercial, if it's bigger, even if it's just a larger collaborative project, you're coming into code other people wrote. You're coming into a code base that already exists. You are not getting to write it all yourself from scratch. You're not getting to know every single nook and cranny. And part of what you run into is not anyone else there probably knows every nook and cranny either. It's expansive. It's lasted for years. I remember my brief time in and out of AAA years ago where there were parts of the code commented by, I don't want to say his name exactly, this guy, and I was like, hey, I have some questions about this. Where is he? And they said, oh, he's at the competitor. He didn't even work there anymore, right? But this is the challenge. It's coming into code that is beyond, bigger than ourselves, than what we could have done alone. It's coming into problem spaces that go beyond not just what we know now, but what we might know ever. And because the other observation I made at that big company, and at the time I kind of scratched my head, and I'll be honest, at the time I think I was kind of young and still a little naive, a little annoyed by it and didn't seem right, was how many of those hundreds of people who are working on world-class AAA console-shipped titles and stuff year after year after year had never made a game alone, and moreover, maybe couldn't. And I don't mean couldn't in the sense of like they're incapable if they chose to. I mean had never done it before, had never crossed that threshold because they didn't need to. They instead plugged into a much bigger framework in which they understood, I know how to do my part. I know how to trust other people who are doing their parts. I know how to learn just enough of what I have to about the overlap and the intersection to be able to achieve some practical effect and get that applied knowledge, and that proficiency, more than any other thing, more than understanding it all, which is, again, literally impossible, more than just even seeing the big picture, just knowing how to be comfortable, getting to know the piece that they do, getting to know its intersection to other people's stuff, and then being comfortable in that space of there will be things outside of what one brain can hold, is the only way we can build bigger projects, bigger companies, bigger things, bigger games, bigger whatever it is we're doing, bigger projects of any kind, way, shape, or form in society that go beyond what one brain is capable of doing. And so that's what I want to share today. Just again, it can at first feel like there's this struggle to how am I ever going to learn all this? And there's a certain freedom that comes from realizing, give up on learning all of it. You never will. No one can. No one has. And if nothing else, there's these layers of abstraction where it's like we can always go as deep towards the metal as we want. I've got friends who work on the actual like process or architecture stuff, and they're very low, close to the metal. They're still kind of trusting the metallurgists. They're still kind of trusting somebody else in the manufacturing process, who's still trusting somebody else in, at some level or tier, the mining process and what's going on. And we can choose where we are in that abstraction of how much we want to be able to work at more conceptual level, how much we want to work at more down in the weeds, close to the metal. But no one understands that entire pipeline in full breadth. And again, what this really does is it helps unlock our ability to say, what part interests me? Where do I want to find my niche? Where do I want to kind of gain my comfort? Where do I want to establish that, okay, here's the utility I bring to a bigger team, to a bigger project, to something bigger, so that when you join up with others, when you take part in, whether it's finding a gig, whether it's just doing collaborative projects or otherwise, you can really bring something substantial that none of the rest of them would be able to do because it's outside of what any given one of them have gained that expertise and mastery in either. Anyway, that was the thought today. I just want to share that again, if it seems like it's too hard to learn it all, in a positive sense, you can't, so stop trying to. This is actually, by the way, also coincidentally the last week as of January 2021 to apply to Lighthouse. That's a new third group we started in Home Team Game Dev. If it's after January, obviously you can still apply to Lighthouse, but basically we've got this special thing going on where you'll be a founding member of Lighthouse since the group just started a couple weeks ago, middle of January 2021, and that'll get you fast-tracked past before there's a waitlist starting to form for Lighthouse. Otherwise, if it's past January, of course, you can still apply to Home Team at hometeamgamedev.com, including find out about how our collaborative approach helps people learn to make games as a team, and how that ultimately feeds back into their learning process, their real experience, their applied understanding of doing things in a way that is bigger than what any given person alone can be achieving. So that's it for today. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you next time.